Hey everyone, this is Adam with Dental Ads and SEO. I'm here with another episode of the Dental Strategy Studio. Today we have a very special guest, Mike Rogers. He's a practice broker in the St. Louis area. He's been doing this for years, and he is here to answer questions that every practice owner needs to know the answers to future-proof their practice and make sure that they are on target for a smooth exit with the strategy in place so that they can retire and meet their goals that they're looking to achieve. So without further ado, here it is. All right, so tell me, you're here with DDS Match. How did you get started with DDS Match?
Great question. So I guess first, I have a history in the dental industry. So that's, where it really started. I was a outside sales rep for Patterson Dental, started in January 1999 with Patterson in St. Louis. And I did that for several years. Then managed the Kansas City and the St. Louis locations for Patterson. Moved on to Dentsply Sirona, was a sales rep and then also regional manager for them. And I always wanted to own my own business, and I have more of an entrepreneurial spirit. And that kind of started with my management role at Patterson, because when I first started at Patterson, it was, my regional manager handed me the keys and basically said, "Don't mess this up." Right. So it was, learning as you went along. And I thrived actually under that. I loved it. So I wanted to get back to that, and was looking at businesses that I could buy and realized DDS Match is a franchise. It's, own my own thing. And this is obviously an industry I knew, network I already had. And I knew the founder of DDS Match, Thad Miller. He was also a manager at Patterson Dental. And so I just reached out to him and said, let's talk. So it's kind of where it started. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so DDS Match is a nationwide
It is.
brand?
It is. Yeah. So again, Thad Miller founded it over 15 years ago. I'm not sure. I don't remember the exact date. And then he started franchising it probably 5 years after that. And I was around the 10th franchise. I started early in 2018, but there's now, we're in every state except maybe 2. There's over 50 advisors.
Oh, wow.
We have a national meeting every fall in Indianapolis, and every year I show up and there's 10 more people that I've never met before. So
wow,
it's been fantastic growth, and I really love it. It's a great group of people, and almost everyone that's joined has 20 plus years of dental experience. So someone brings something else to the table, right? Whether it's they were worked for a bank and they were on the financing side for a long time, and so they come from a different approach and have different knowledge to bring. So it's a fantastic group of professionals that I learn from every week. We have a weekly call every Monday morning. Actually, it's now, we just shifted to the afternoons, but every Monday afternoon we have a Zoom call where we're just talking about, what we're doing, learning from each other. There's always some weird question that comes up in a transition, right?
Sure.
So something no one's ever seen before. So we're just asking the group, has anyone else ever seen this, or how would you handle this?
Yeah, I could see that, because every office is different. There are no two that are exactly alike.
Exactly. Right. It's a living, breathing entity, right? You're dealing with people, so it's always going to be different.
Yeah, it is interesting that way. There's there's a lot of different dental offices that I've worked with and you've worked with, and even though dentistry is the same subject, every single one has its own challenges, unique things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now, so you are selling, and you're selling practices mainly is how that works, right? Like someone finds you to help sell their practice.
That's the majority of what we do. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, so we're a dental broker is what I call myself, but within that, right, there's different aspects of what we do. Helping owners sell their practice is a big piece of that, but we also help owners find associates to join their practice. If they want to create a partnership, really anything to do with the transition itself of a dentist in the practice and all of the subsidiaries around that, right? So whether it's just planning for an eventual transition, it's valuating the practice, how much is it worth today, valuing the real estate if they own the real estate. So anything involved with an actual transition or planning of the transition.
Interesting. So it's not even just, you mentioned, this is something I hear a lot talking to dentists. They're looking for like, hey, I'm ready to bring on an associate, or I'm looking for an associate. And that is like sometimes a hard search.
It is.
How,
Yes.
how does DDS match, and how do you specifically DDS match? How does that part go?
So that's, in theory, it's really similar to finding a buyer, right? So part of it is just the network that we have helps with that process. So again, I'm one of about 50 individuals nationwide. So I spend time every year going into the local dental schools, meeting the, fourth year students, some of the third year students, and just understanding what they're looking for, right? Their biggest concern is, what am I going to do when I graduate? Where am I going to work? Most of them, right? Sometimes they're going to go into a residency program, but most of them, it's finding a job. So we have that network with all of these schools nationwide. So, when owners then are looking to hire an associate, we're already tapped into the young dentists coming out. But, again, I've been doing this for 7.5 years now. So there's, students I met 2 and 3 years ago that maybe they went to work somewhere that's not working out. So they're ready for a change. So it's just that network that you build over time that helps us find those individuals, and being in the local market, right? So we do traditional marketing to find associates, whether that's Facebook, Google Ads, LinkedIn, all of the social media. I place ads in the local Dental Society, the Greater St. Louis Dental Society Journal. But it's also just knowing all of the professionals in the area, right? So I might not have met this dentist, but, maybe the Patterson rep or the Shine rep or the manufacturing rep or a banker or a dental CPA or all of the other people that I talk to and network with on a regular basis might know someone. So it's that constant reaching out of, hey, I have this new opportunity. Do you know anyone that would be a fit? So that being in the local market, I think, has a big advantage to finding those people.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a lot of different people that you kind of mentioned, between like dental schools and dental CPAs. And is there are there some specific people that you like keep working with as you're doing this process? Are there specific individuals you find that keep doing business with you and things? Or
as far as like dentists,
like these dental related things, like you mentioned, like a dental CPA, or there are like a few dental CPAs in the area that you work with? Or
yes, yeah,
okay,
yeah, absolutely. There's not a ton of CPAs that just work with dentists, but yeah, there's a few. And same thing with lawyers. Lawyers will work with all types of different industries, but there's a few that have a lot of experience. So it's just reaching out to those same individuals. From a resource standpoint for helping find dentists, probably the biggest is, for me, is banks and the sales reps in the area, right? Whether that's their supply reps or manufacturing reps, because they have good relationships. So most of them are going into these offices on a routine basis and really get to know the individuals. So when they're looking to make a change, they, tend to be some of the first to know.
Yeah, because we know that every dentist is an individual, and they all have their own goals and their own aspirations for the practice, or exit plans or not exit plans or transition plans or different things like that.
Yeah.
So I guess with you here, you're buying and selling practices on a regular routine basis, right? I know that there are a lot of doctors that have that aspiration of, hey, I want to retire and sell my practice. I want to move on to another phase in life. I want to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
They have those dreams of hiring associates and moving into where they're not needed in the day-to-day running of the practice.
Sure.
What would you say? And I know sometimes people have questions, but maybe it's like, where do you even start with that? Like, you're a dentist, right? You have your practice. Maybe you started as an associate. Maybe you landed somewhere. I think for a doctor, maybe they started as an associate many years ago, and then they bought the practice from the owner on some sort of, like owner equity, owner loan deal or something like that, a while ago. And now they're starting to kind of think about someday maybe retiring or something like that, right? So where would a practice owner kind of start? Like, how does this begin? How do they actually, it's one thing to think a thought, I'd like to retire. How
Right.
does that get put into motion? How does something like that start?
Uh, a phone call.
Okay.
Really, it's a conversation. No different than what we're doing here. And my goal in that conversation is just to find out what's important to them and what they're thinking about, right? So I'm an advisor. So my goal is to ask them a bunch of questions to understand again what they're thinking about and why they're thinking about that. So whether it's to, hire an associate, okay, well, why do you want to hire an associate? What's your goal by hiring the associate? Do you want to scale back your time so that you can spend more time as a leader and CEO of the practice? Do you want to hire an associate so they can do more? The associate does more of the general dentistry, and you want to do more advanced procedures. You want to place more implants, oral surgery, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's different as to why they want to, for one example, hire an associate. And because then that helps me identify what would the associate need to be able to fill this role. And then learning more about, the culture of the practice. If they're looking to sell the practice, right, then it's just understanding, same thing, right? Why are we here? If you've decided to sell the practice, let me understand if you're actually ready to sell the practice, right? Are you mentally ready? Are you emotionally ready? And are you financially ready, right? You got to be able to cover three things before you can actually do it. And on top of that, what are you, how do you want this actual transition to work? People sell their dental practice for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes they're just ready to retire and move on to the next phase of their life. Sometimes it's, I still enjoy being a dentist, but I don't enjoy managing the ownership of the office anymore, right? The staff give me headaches. I hate dealing with insurance companies, right? It's usually the same couple of problems I hear about over and over. And I totally understand that. So the solution to their problem is going to be different for every individual. But understanding why we're here today, there's usually a pain source that's causing that. So let's figure out what the solution is. Maybe it is selling the practice. Maybe it's selling it 3 years from now. Maybe it's finding an associate and we create, a plan that alleviates that stress point and you still stay in the practice. It's all different, but it starts with that conversation to just truly understand why we're here.
Yeah. And so what would you say is kind of like, what might that person be going through where the solution is for them to start that call, right? Like what kinds of things are they running into in their practice where maybe they're on the fence about it? Maybe it's like, is it, man, am I just having a bad day today? Do I really need to move on to the next phase here? Like what kinds of things might a person be experiencing in their practice that would let them know, hey, it's time to give us a call and start talking about a transition plan?
There's no one thing, right? Every person's different, but the most common call I get is from a senior doctor that, is 60, approaching 60, and they feel like that's just the next step. Whether it's, they don't enjoy dentistry anymore. Again, they don't enjoy the ownership. And that typically comes down to the two I mentioned earlier, right? It's staff issues, whether that's fighting amongst the staff and they don't like being the police anymore, between the hygienist and the dental assistant. Or today it's finding staff, right? There's a big staff shortage in the market. And then the other common thing is insurance companies, right? They feel like they're constantly getting squeezed, and sometimes they're like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. So those are the pain points that typically come. Sometimes it's physical, right? Like I'm getting to that point. Dentistry can be physically demanding. And, if you're 60 years old and you've been doing this for 30 plus years, sometimes that takes a toll on the body. And sometimes doctors call me because they just say, I can't do it anymore. Right. So everyone's different as to how they get there. The flip side, I've I had a call this year with a dentist in Central Illinois that is 83 and he still loves dentistry and still wants to continue dentistry, right? So everyone's different.
Mm-hmm.
He's ready to move on now at 83, but I've sold practices for people that were, in their 40s that just realized they didn't want to be an owner, and or they wanted to do something else with their career. So everyone's different. It's hard to say this is the one thing or a couple things that come out. So it's just more of, if you're thinking of, I need a change, I'm here as a free resource to have a confidential conversation, and not just me, they should reach out to other advisors that they have in their inner circle, right? Whether that's their spouse, a colleague, their dental CPA, lawyer, financial advisor. Hopefully those people are people that they trust, that they can lean on and ask those questions. But this is what I do. If they come to a transition question and they're just trying to figure out what's the next step, free advice. My goal is to educate and be a free resource to, dentists in the greater St. Louis area.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we're talking about, these are some signs that it might be time to sell your practice, right? At the same time, there's also, at the other side of that, at the opposite end of getting to 60, there's also people that are, let's say they recently graduated dental school, or like you met with them while they're in dental school. And maybe at that time, the concept of opening your own practice and running your own business is a bit daunting. And there's an allure of a corporate dentistry contract sitting there where you can plug in, right?
Right.
Okay, so now for someone that's, maybe they went that route, right? Maybe they've been working with an unnamed corporate dental organization or something, right, for a couple of years, and they're starting to think, I don't know this is going to be for me for my long-term plan. What would be something like that would cause, that would kind of prompt reaching out, or what would that kind of conversation or transition be like?
So I would say that's very common. That's the majority of the calls that I have with the younger dentist. They go to work for a corporate entity out of school. They usually have good compensation, good benefits that they offer. Most times they have full schedules, so new grads can step right into busy schedules and learn quickly. Hopefully they have a mentor there, so they're learning the right way quickly. But that's, most times when they're calling me, they've been doing that for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and they've come to the realization that either A, they want to buy their own practice because I don't want to, this practice is relying on me, and so I might as well own my own company to make more money and control what I want to control. Or the other is, not every corporation does a great job, so sometimes they're just burnt out of working for a large corporation, whether that's they feel like they're a number or they have to hit a quota or have to do dentistry a certain way, and they just want that control, that clinical control back. So those are the calls that I get. And, those are always different, right? Some people are set on, hey, I know my next step is buying a practice. Sometimes it's, I'm not ready for a practice, I want an associateship. And sometimes it's in between of, hey, I don't know what I want to do. I just know I need change. I can't stay where I'm at. Right?
I don't know what, but it's not this.
It's not this. Right. Which usually, there's a good in between too. So, back to what we were talking about with the seller, depending on their goal, one of the things that I think can be very beneficial as a transition plan is for when the owner says, okay, I know I need to sell in a couple of years, but I'm not ready now, is to bring on an associate with the goal of selling to that associate. And if it's structured the right way, they can be extremely successful. And so those younger dentists that call me and say, hey, I need a change, but I don't know what I need to do. Sometimes that's the best solution for them, is they're not necessarily ready to buy yet, but they know that's in their future, of aligning them with someone who wants to bring on an associate, because then that owner can teach them and mentor them through the next 2 years or whatever their time frame is before then they eventually buy.
Right? Like if you were looking for an associate, that could be like, is that months? Is that a year? Like if a person was like, hey, I'm out of contract, I'm ready to go, I want to help find me an associateship. Just when it sounds like there's a big need for associates, and if you're ready to take on an associate role, that could be a short transition, right? Like how long would that usually take to place someone, you think?
Um, the area depends a lot.
Area depends a lot. Okay.
Right. There's going to be more demand in, Metro St. Louis compared to, your rural markets. There's certain areas of St. Louis that obviously are going to have a higher demand as well. So that changes. But in your larger metropolitan areas, I would say a couple months.
Couple months.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's with the owner of the practice interviewing, several different dentists to find the one that they feel is the best fit for their practice. Knowing then that once they've found someone, they make them an offer, they probably won't join the practice for 2 or 3 months.
Oh, right.
Because most likely the associate has a contract somewhere else that they have to give some sort of notice to. 60 days is pretty common. I've seen several with 90 days.
Okay.
Which can be great too, depending on the situation, because the owner, the practice that they're joining probably has to ramp up, right? Whether that's, getting new patients in from a marketing standpoint, or maybe they need staff, right? If this is a second dentist joining the practice, maybe they need another assistant, maybe they need another hygienist. So that time frame can help them at least get up to speed before the associate actually joins the practice.
Okay, so if bringing on an associate might be a 2-3 month process for an associate to find a location, and then another 3 months, to do that transition and get brought into the practice. When we're thinking about that whole process for the young dentist joining the practice might be one step of many for the dentist looking to make a transition out of the practice. How long would you say that takes, right, between, for the young dentist, like you said, okay, I don't know what I want, but it's not this, 6 months, a year, they can be in a new spot fairly easily. We could kind of estimate.
Right.
For a dentist to say, hey, I'm now ready to transition out of my practice. Do you measure that in weeks, days? How do you usually measure that time period?
Months as
Months.
well. Months as well. Yeah.
That's months.
Yeah.
How long could it take for a dentist to do an exit from like where they're at to officially sold and on the beach somewhere?
Again, that changes quite a bit based on the practice itself and just the goals of the owner. I would say I tell doctors all the time, plan on 6 to 18 months. Now, I've sold a practice from the listing time when they hired me to when we actually closed and they were out of the practice was 5 weeks. Now, that was an exceptional case. It was a medical reason, so everyone knew we had to move quickly to get this done. I have had other practices that have taken over 2 years to sell. So it really depends on the location of the practice has a big factor, and then the practice itself, right? Buyers are looking for, the profitability of the practice, the technology that's in the practice, is it fully staffed, right? There's several factors that they're going to look at to make that decision, but usually first and foremost is location, right? Is this an area that I want to work and live for the rest of my career?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because they're going to be there.
Right. So again, practices in metropolitan areas is typically where the majority of dentists want to live, right? So for us in St. Louis, people want to be in Metro St. Louis. Practices that, are just an hour away, maybe. And even some larger cities, Columbia, Missouri, Rolla, Jeff City, right? That will take longer just because there's a fewer number of buyers that want to settle down in that area.
What are some things you see that a dentist would be doing in their practice to, let's say, improve the curb appeal of their practice, right? What are some areas you would see a dentist work on or improve, or kind of advice you'd give to a dentist to help improve that?
Absolutely. So I guess the first advice, which is somewhat self-serving, is to reach out to someone like myself or another advisor, because I think you need, on some level, outside eyes to look at it to really understand what needs to be changed,
Hmm.
right? When we're in the middle of everything, it's hard to see, the bigger picture, right? So, it's the old analogy, you need to spend time working on your business, not in your business. And sometimes, especially dentists, their view is a black hole that they're staring into, the oral cavity all day long. So
Sure.
sometimes it's hard to see the outside and what improvements need to be made.
Hmm.
That said, in some ways, it's not a lot different than selling real estate, at least initially. So the curb appeal does factor into it. It won't necessarily change the value of your practice, but it will change the attractiveness to buyers to want to purchase your practice. So yeah, just walk through the office and see what needs to be updated. When was the last time, the carpet was replaced or new paint was up, new decorations? How old is your equipment? Do you have duct tape holding together your dental unit? Those little things can make a big difference. Sometimes investing in technology and new equipment is a smart decision, but it really depends on the time frame that they're looking to sell and the technology or what they're investing in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is a whole separate conversation. That could be a half-hour conversation of how to determine that.
Yeah.
But the initial is, from a cosmetic standpoint, just getting that look. But the bigger things is going to take longer to really figure out is looking under the hood, right? And that is what's the profitability of the practice? That's a lot of what buyers are looking for because that's what they're buying, right? If I'm going to spend $1 million and get a loan for $1 million to buy your practice, what is my cash flow that I'm getting? So understanding how profitable the practice is. So knowing the overhead of the practice, are your expenses in line with the industry average? Are you getting new patients? Those are the things that really should be looked at in, finer detail to understand what changes can be made. Because that's going to be the bigger driver in what buyers are really looking at.
Okay. So not necessarily, I mean, the cosmetics is, I get what you're saying. Like the new buyer might, you might decide to redo your practice in the color green and they hate the color green. And then all of a sudden we lost somebody from that. So not necessarily cosmetic, but the under the hood numbers of the practice.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone's starting to think about selling a practice, how long might they want to work on those under the hood numbers, before it actually goes to listing it? Like how long might that journey be to say, hey, I'm looking at selling my practice? And from what I'm gathering, it's the time to call you is when you start thinking, I'm looking at selling my practice or moving out of this phase, right? That's the spot to call you.
Yeah. Before that, actually.
Before that. Okay. So if you haven't any thought about it, it's time to call. And from there, you can help work out a plan of, hey, over the next X amount of time, here are some things that we should improve about the practice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, because keep in mind, Adam, that right, you own a business, I own a business. At some point, both of us are going to exit our business.
Sure.
Right. So whether that dentist has owned the practice for 2 years and is 30 years old, or they're 60, at some point they will exit that business. You need to have a plan to exit it. Now, should I talk to the guy who's gonna, or girl that's gonna graduate or sell their business in 30 years? No, probably not. That's a little premature. But 5 years out, absolutely. 10 years out, I don't see why not. Because the more they can understand what the market looks like today and what their options are or where improvements need to be made, they have the time to do that. So meeting with someone before you're really ready to retire is going to give you more options and more control over the process. If you talk to someone a year ahead of time, there's hardly any changes that can be made, right? You're not going to change really the value of your practice if you're a year out, because the valuation process, the banks that are looking at, should I finance this note for the buyer? They're looking at the last 3 years of history. So you could have a huge change in your last 12 months in the profitability of your practice or the collections of your practice. And it might change it a little bit, but it's not going to change it dramatically because they're going to question, why did that happen? And is it repeatable? If you've done it for 3 years, we know it's repeatable and the value is going to go up. A year out, you're looking at cosmetic changes just to make the attractiveness. So the earlier you can talk to someone just to understand what are my different options 5 years from now, that doesn't mean you have to go with the one that you settle on today, but having an idea of maybe this is the direction I want to go, and you start to work towards, well, what improvements can we make, or how do we get to that eventual endpoint? And if you then meet with that person, every year up until then, maybe you switch goals. Maybe right. Life changes. Curveballs are thrown at us all the time, but having a plan in place, now at least you know what your options are. And so to me, that's the biggest advantage. The sooner you talk to someone, it's going to give you more options and more control. And I think that's what most people want.
Yeah, that was huge. That was a big shift there, just that concept, thinking about that, right? Because I think sometimes you can get so stuck in your, what's my plan for today? What's my plan for this month? Am I hitting my production target this month or something like that? That's a really powerful idea to keep that in mind, that at one point you signed a contract and you bought this business, and your plan is at some point you're going to leave this business.
Right.
And so I get it, not as on your way out the door with the ink still wet on the contract, right? But go have fun for a minute there, right? But then at some point, that's a good way to keep that eye on the prize there, right? Keep your eye on the mountain up there of, I'm going to be selling this practice. Okay, am I on target? What does this look like? What is this going to be? What's going to be the appeal to the market for this in the future? I think that's a really awesome insight to keep that in mind. Like, let's do a pulse check on that every couple years or something. Am I on target? Am I off target? What are they selling for? Am I going to,
absolutely,
is that what I need to sell it for? What would I need to do to help me sell it for what I need to sell it for?
Right.
Okay. Right. That's great. And I like that.
And that aligns, I think, with their financial advisor, right? So I think there's several consultants that should help in that process. I'm just one small piece of what it should be, a team of 4 or 5 individuals helping guide them.
Yeah, they're financial advisors for sure, and all their finances and things. But your insight on what's the current market doing, the direction it's headed, what's the temperature of the market right now, et cetera, would definitely be a very valuable piece of input.
Yes,
in that for sure.
Right. But again, even 5 years ahead of time, right? If you are meeting with me 5 years ahead of time, but you also are meeting with your, financial advisor, your spouse, your other trusted advisors, your financial advisor is going to be able to say, okay, if we sold your practice for X, when can you retire? How much longer do you need to start working? Because that's a big piece of the puzzle.
It's a big piece of the puzzle, right? For sure.
And then from there, it's breaking down to, okay, well, what about the other, the emotional piece, right? You've built this practice. Are you ready to let go? Or when will you be ready to let go? And then the mental piece sometimes is, what are you doing after this? Right? That's a big question that people, they think they're going to, I hear all the time, I'm just going to play golf. You can't play golf every day. No. I know you think that you will. Right? So it's really understanding, what is my life going to look like after this? What are the hobbies, to know that I truly am ready to get to that point? And again, you don't need to know that 5 years ahead of time, but you need to start thinking about that to prepare for that eventual piece of your next phase in life. Again, that's why I think the more people that can be involved, the better, because you're just going to have a much better holistic approach to it.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
But do you have some sort of back of the envelope, quick math, general estimate of what a practice might sell for today, or a way that a person could kind of come up with an idea, like ballpark?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And what's that real quick back of the envelope math?
Because again, it's more complicated than this. And this,
absolutely complicated.
The industry average is nationwide practices will sell for roughly 70% of their previous 12 months collections.
Okay.
So that's the easy back of the envelope math.
Yeah.
However, I will also tell you that is one of my biggest pet peeves, or the biggest myths that's out on in the industry, is because I hear that often from buyers and sellers, right? Well, so this practice should sell for X because that's what the industry average is. Well, it's the industry average over, was 150,000 dentists in the U.S. So the average in St. Louis is going to be different than the national average. The average for, Clayton, Missouri is going to be different than the average for Florissant, Missouri. So, you can use that average, but that is just to give you a rule of thumb guideline.
Got it.
I've seen practices sell for less than 50% of their collections, and I've seen them sold at 100% and slightly higher than 100% of collections.
Wow.
So it's an average, back of the envelope.
Sure.
Figure it out.
Asterisks, provisos,
Right.
disclaimers, all the rest of
Correct.
it. But if someone is sitting there and they're listening to this and they're kind of, thinking or getting a concept, that might be somewhere to think about. Taking a look at your average 3 years of collections and somewhere in that kind of ballpark, what you mentioned, kind of national average 70%, but could be low as 50%, could be high as 100%, but it's certainly not like a 3x multiple of their average collections or something like that, right? That's not what's happening.
That's
right
not
now.
what's happening. And I would say the biggest factor is going to be the profitability of the practice, right? So here's the best example I can give of why there can be such a big range. Is you take two practices, they're both collecting $1 million annually. One of them has 50% overhead, so the owner is making $500,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
The other one has a 70% overhead, and that owner is making $300,000 a year. And that is actually quite common. The industry average is 68% overhead. So those two practices are going to sell for completely different prices. One of them, the owner's making $500,000 a year, doing the same amount of dentistry, and the other one is doing $300,000 a year. So the one that's making $500,000 a year is going to sell for more, and it's going to have more buyers that want to buy that practice.
Interesting. And that might be also a good, again, kind of temperature check if you're listening and thinking about this for your practice. Okay, again, back to the envelope math here, right, of 68% overhead, right? If you do your math real quick and you're finding your overhead is higher than 68%, that might be time to meet with your financial advisor, call Mike, because you're not on a trajectory that's going to sell for a good rate of what you're looking for probably, or it could be improved. And again, like you said, that can be a years-long process of fixing things.
Correct.
Whether it's pricing, insurance, staffing, et cetera. There's there's a Rubik's Cube of different things, right? It's the same things, but every office is going to have different elements and issues with those things.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what I mean? What's a common piece of advice you find yourself giving when someone's calling looking to start to sell their practice?
Well, I guess those are two different answers.
Okay.
Because the advice I want to give them is you should have called me a year ago.
Okay, the advice is to call a year ago.
But what they are typically not prepared for is the time frame, and that they've waited too long to call me, that they don't have, like, you have one solution. Because the majority of people call me, and the first time I've talked to them, they say, okay, I'm ready to retire. I'm ready to list my practice and sell it. How quickly can you sell it? Right? That's typically the mentality of, I want to be done by the end of this year. Some of them have a realistic time frame of, I know this is going to take, 3 to 6 months to find a buyer, and then another 2 to 3 months to actually close once we find the right buyer. So, but it's typically, they're not prepared for, the limited options that they have.
Interesting.
Because
So
again, at that point, we're not changing anything to the practice. If you call me and say, I want to list the practice and start to sell it today, well, it is what it is. I can talk through what you prefer to have happen, and hopefully your practice is in good enough shape that you have more options. Unfortunately, more times than not, it is, this is the shape your practice is in, and your one option is to sell to a private buyer and walk away, which might be exactly what they're looking for. Right? But again, if someone calls 3 years ahead of time, we can talk through if they wanted to stay on board as, after they've sold, right? Sometimes the owner now becomes the associate. If they wanted to sell to a group that already has multiple locations in the area, or if they wanted to sell to a corporate entity, a DSO, private equity back group, right? All of those are going to have different nuances to them that if they call me and say, I want to be done in 6 months, most of those other options are going to be off the table.
I think this is a phenomenal takeaway from this conversation here, that if you are waiting until it's time to retire to call the broker about selling your practice, it's kind of like the time to do this is, okay, great. Let's do it when you're thriving and make sure you have an exit strategy. It's kind of like, well, I mean, you're going to retire, right? Like,
Right.
it's not like all of a sudden it shouldn't. Let's not have it be a surprise that someday you plan to retire.
Right.
Right. Like, so we know that's coming, and you have, your plans with your financial advisor that you're setting aside for retirement and your accounts and all the rest of it and things like that. Same, you're going to meet with your financial advisor throughout your life, right? You're going to, hey, how am I doing? Am I on target? My goals are changing. I need more insurance for this, or I'm saving for this, or kids going to college, et cetera. And you're constantly meeting with your financial advisor to make sure your retirement goals are on track.
Right.
It's important to make sure your practice is also in alignment with that eventual date that's coming.
Right.
No surprise. There's going to be a day when you say you're done. And whether it's
Father Time always wins.
He's coming. So whether it's that guy you mentioned, a doctor that was 85, right? And he's still going strong and fine. And his plan might be to do something different in the next 5 years, or who knows. And some people might have that plan that they're looking at it at 60. So I think that's really very useful to, like, before you're ready to sell, before you're even thinking about selling.
Right.
You're 35 years old, you're running your dental practice. Let's have a consult. You are going to retire. You're going to phase out. You're going to, at some point, that's going to end.
Right.
Are you on target for the current market, and making sure you're on track with that?
Right.
I really like that.
And I guess I will, make a stipulation there, and that is, I'm not recommending you hire me.
Sure.
5 years ahead of time. Right. I offer free advice, and I know at least my colleagues at DDS Match throughout the nation do the same thing, right? I think that's one of the things that does separate us from other brokers and some of our competition, right? Is our goal is to create a plan that is customized for them and works best for them. So what I'm advising is call and have those conversations, those confidential, complimentary conversations, to understand what the market looks like today and understand what your practice might be valued at, or the options you might have when you're ready. Because again, that can change over time, but just having an idea of here's where it's at today, this snap in time, right? August 2025 will help you then prepare for what you want it to look like, August 2028, whatever your goal is.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you about another question. You talked about selling to a private buyer. Do you also represent sellers selling to corporate buyers?
I do, yes.
Okay, so some of the larger companies, the nationwide corporate dentistries, you'll represent selling the practice to those corporate buyers.
Absolutely.
Do you find that those sales to corporate buyers have a higher rate of return than to an individual buyer, or does that not matter?
It's complicated. I would say on average, no. I would say it's pretty even, but you have to take everything into consideration when I'm making that statement, right? Meaning, would a private equity corporate group offer more for your practice today in the total value than a private buyer? Probably, slightly. However, the corporate group is going to ask the owner to stay on board as an associate now for most likely 3 years. 5 years is becoming more common, especially since the pandemic. So if you factor in the difference in your income for the next 3 years as the owner of the practice versus being an associate in that practice, and coupled that with the difference that the corporation is valuing your practice for you, it's typically a wash. And not all the time. Again, they're all different, but a lot of times it's actually better to sell to a private individual. So part of it comes back to, why are you wanting to sell? And what are you hoping to get out of this? So again, it's very common where doctors will call me and say, I think I'm ready to sell. I just can't stand owning a practice anymore, right? I can't stand dealing with the staff and the insurance companies and the marketing and X, Y, and Z, right? Those can be great conversations to talk about the benefits of DSOs and corporate dentistry, right? Because they can solve a lot of those problems for them. But if you're just looking at pure financial, not typically. The other piece to think about, though, is their risk tolerance, because a private buyer is going to, let's say we value your practice at $1 million. Well, the private buyer is going to get a loan for $1 million, and the day you close, you're going to have $1 million in your checking account. A DSO, if we have the same valuation of $1 million, is most of them are going to give you a portion of that in cash. The average for the last couple of years is about 60% of that. It's trending down closer to 50. But let's say you would get $600,000 in cash, and then the remaining $400,000 is going to be in whether it's equity within the DSO or earn-out clauses or other clauses to get you to that point. So then you're relying on, what is my risk tolerance, right? If I've got another $400,000 that's in this DSO stock, what is the confidence that the value of that stock is going to grow? And that's where a lot of times that can be beneficial. That's where a lot of DSOs actually get owners to buy in, because they promise them these returns. And I'm not saying that they don't happen, but
Risk tolerance.
You have to analyze your risk tolerance because it's possible that it won't happen at all, and then you just got $600,000.
Okay. That's an important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at those different options.
So if you don't mind managing the practice, if you're like, it's not, I love the office, the staff is great, none of that gives me a headache, typically it doesn't make sense to sell to a corporation.
Okay. Good to keep in mind. So people have different options for brokers. Why would someone call Mike Rogers about their needs to sell a practice? Why would they call you? What makes you stand out from others?
My fantastic personality.
Well, obviously that, yeah.
I think there's a couple reasons. I think that I've been in the St. Louis market for 26 years now, helping dentists. Is a big piece of that. I think the way that DDS Match is structured is a big differentiator between most of our competition. So I think the fact that we are a nationwide organization is a big factor, because as a group, we spend $100,000 plus every year with Google ads alone, right? So we're attracting the buyers that the sellers are looking for. The fact that we're nationwide, we're going into a lot of the dental schools, building relationships with the younger dentists. So we have a large network of buyers, right? On our website right now, I think we have 20,000 buyers profiles. Coupled with, we're also local, right? Even though we're nationwide, I only work with dentists in my corner of the world, right? So I'm in St. Louis. I cover about a 3-hour radius from St. Louis. I've worked with dentists in this area from Columbia, Missouri to Springfield, Illinois, for, again, 26 years since I started with Patterson Dental. So I know a lot of the people in St. Louis. I know what the market value is. I know that there's a difference between Jefferson City's practice value and, South County, St. Louis practice values. So I think that's a big factor as well. DDS Match uses a third-party company to do our business valuations. So DDS Match brings a lot of transparency to the process. So it's helpful then, because it's not me deciding, hey, here's what your business is worth. It's not the owner deciding that or the owner's CPA. It's a completely third-party independent group that is telling us, here's what the practice is worth. So that brings some trust with the buyers and with the buyers' advisors. So their banks, their lawyers that they're working with, we are seen as a respected group when it comes to fair valuations for the practice. So I think that just sets the process off to a right start of we're here for a win-win for everybody. We're going to customize the approach for what the owner doctor wants. We only represent the seller in the process. So there's no dual representation, no bias there, clouding our judgment. So those are probably the main reasons. I think at the end of the day, the other part though, is you just have to trust the person that you're working with, right? This can be a very intimate experience, right? Whoever you hire, you're going to share all of the good, bad, and the ugly of your practice, right? You're going to share your tax returns and your profit and loss statements, and they're going to ask you a bunch of questions, or they should ask you a bunch of questions of what's really happening in your practice and what's important to you. So you need to feel comfortable with that person just as an individual to have them help you with this next phase.
So in terms of getting a practice ready for sale, do you often have advice for doctors to make sure they're on track with marketing and new patients? And what is that advice for them?
Usually it's just finding out what they're doing now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So understanding where are patients coming from now, how many new patients do they get, a month? Are they spending anything on marketing? Or are they relying on, patients from the PPOs that they're in? So first of it is just understanding where they're at and then advising them on how that could or could not impact the desirability or the valuation of their practice. It's more the desirability, right? Buyers and banks that are financing the buyers really want to make sure that there's a healthy number of new patients coming into the practice. So yes, that's a big factor. It really depends then on the office and where they're at. But yeah, typically if it's low, it's then talking to them of, have you considered working with a marketing company? Do you spend anything with, whether it's Google ads or Facebook marketing, social media, whatever it is. But it's an important piece of the process.
Okay. And what would you say is a healthy number of new patients?
I would say anything over 20 new patients a month is typically pretty good, depending on the area.
Okay.
Yeah. And depending on the type of practice it is, right? There are some offices that are 100% fee for service. That number is probably going to be different than an office that is 90% PPO driven.
And the number would be higher for the PPO driven office.
It should be, yes.
Okay. So for like a PPO driven office, you're looking closer to 30 plus a month would be a healthy number, or what kind of number are you looking for in that situation?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Because fee for service, you're definitely gonna have a different level of profitability there.
Yes, it should be higher, right? So those offices, the established ones with the owners that I'm talking with, right? So that are later in their career, usually aren't spending a lot on marketing. At that point, a lot of it is word of mouth. It's referrals. Mid-career, they're spending more on marketing to attract those patients, especially if they're fee for service. Yeah, or even mainly fee for service, right? It's very common for me to see practices that are in network with maybe one or two large insurance companies, and then the remaining is out of network.
Okay, great.
But yeah, so anything, if you're in the 20 plus range, regardless of if it's PPO or fee for service, 25 plus new patients a month, you're doing pretty good because you're probably losing close to that, just, regular attrition, whether that's, people are dying, moving away, whatever that is, you're losing patients every year. So you need to be gaining new ones too.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I appreciate you taking the time. This was a lot of fun talking. So if you're a dentist looking to sell your practice or you're a dentist operating your practice, I think the big takeaway here today is give Mike a call and get this process started and make sure you're on the right track. If you're in the middle of your practice or if you're getting towards the end, let's get that call going to start moving into your next phase.
Thank you for having me, Adam. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Dental Strategy Studio. My name's Adam Heft with Dental Ads and SEO. And if you're ready to take your practice to the next level with bringing in more new patients, you can find my link down below and you can set up a strategy call. Looking forward to talk to you soon.